Hi, everybody. I'm Jordan Ostroff from LegalEase Marketing, and this is Exhibit A Attorneys, where we interview attorneys and other experts around the country to talk about what it truly takes to be the Exhibit A of a successful lawyer. There's probably no better expert, or at least certainly not that many, than Roos, who's joining me today. Today, we're going to talk about the legal marketing fast lane, how to build your competitive advantage. And this is something that I really think needs to be hammered home by so many attorneys. And I'm so glad that we have the opportunity to have his insight on this as well. Because remember, there are 1.3 million attorneys in the country, at least last I checked. There's probably more since then. And so when somebody has to hire an attorney, you've got to be number one of 1.3 million. So if anybody doesn't already know Jan, he has generated millions in revenue for law firms through digital advertising for his agency Case Fuel and his best-selling book on the subject, The Legal Marketing Fast Lane. After seeing the success of his largest clients, he's added helping firms double their case files without increasing spend through focusing on intake processes, in addition to innovation in new ways to bring clients using paid traffic. They focus on over 100 plus estate planning firms in the last year. The key to this is teaching clients about making a non-urgent sale like estate planning into something that is urgent. And obviously, nobody wants to face their own mortality and understand that they will die. But I hate to break it to you, it's coming for all of us. So great thing to be able to explain to estate planning attorneys, to explain to their clients in a way where it doesn't come off, I don't know, scummy. Is that a fair word? Used car salesman and whatnot. So
Yeah.
I love what y'all are doing.
All right, awesome, man. I super appreciate the intro. And I'm trying to think, what would be the word that I'd use for it? No one wants to be a salesperson. One of my favorite phrases is, I borrow this from Joe Polish, is that people actually love being sold, but they hate being pressured. And I think a good
Oh,
sale doesn't feel like a sale. If most people think about a situation like used car sales or like one of those like mall kiosk perfume guys, it's not the sale that feels bad about that. It's the pressure.
I always love like you're walking through a fancy upscale mall and suddenly this dude's like, "Yo, you want to try this soap? Here's the soap." I'm like,
Yeah.
"No, I don't."
It's
All
really
right,
funny.
so
Yeah.
we're going to get into how to build your competitive advantage. But before that, I want to talk about our last episode that aired on Monday with Devin Slavinsky, who talked to us about the steps to creating organic community visibility. And while I still don't think anybody will believe me, literally from my entire viewpoint of the show, Devin was upside down due to crazy Windows updates. So I'm glad to have a guest who's right side up. And so Breezy doesn't have to fix it while we go live. Somehow he did it. I have no idea. All right. So, how to build your competitive advantage. I want to start in the most simple way possible. What is a competitive advantage?
Okay, really good question. I think
Thank you.
competitive advantage. Oh, yeah, sorry. But anyways, yeah, competitive advantage is like basically at the end of the day, um, I think one of the challenges that's been facing attorneys in this current era of marketing is not access to clients, it's differentiation from other firms out there. So if we wanted to roll the clock back to like 2005 or something like that, if you were somebody who had a website, that was a competitive advantage. But I think as technology and the market and competition marches forward, you have to kind of figure out what constitutes something that's going to be an advantage and what's just kind of table stakes. And I think the requirements are constantly changing. It could be different for, in downtown Beverly Hills versus, the rural Montana. The competitive advantage could be at a really different place for those different things. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if you're operating from a place of assuming that other people have access to what you have to figure out a reason why somebody's going to pick your firm instead of other firms. And hopefully that reason shouldn't be price if you plan on scaling your firm to any capacity.
I love it. And I think we could do a whole hour on exactly just that last sentence about price. I was reading something. It was like if you compete on price, somebody else was willing to go out of business faster than you, or something like, or competing on price. The worst thing that can happen is you come in second, or like whatever it was. Yeah. So, and I love that it's different for different areas because, like, we have an attorney in Florida who literally the only sales pitch I've ever seen from him on his billboards is he graduated from Harvard Law, and like that's the you should hire my firm because I graduated from Harvard. which I guess is a cool differentiator down here, but I imagine like that's not going to fly in, Boston, Massachusetts. You'll see a lot more of those people. And by those people, I mean Harvard educated lawyers, not anything negative on him.
Yeah.
So are we talking about the competitive advantage being something about, from the standpoint of how it impacts the client's case, the attorney's background, the client's experience? Could it be any of those things? Like what really is a competitive advantage from the 10,000 foot view? And then we'll talk about some hopefully specifically good examples.
Yeah, I was going to say that too, because it's like, I think you mentioned it in the intro, it's like we've been doing a ton of work with estate planning attorneys. But I'll try to keep it like as general as possible, because obviously it's going to be like, a lot of people aren't going to be practicing that area a lot. And frankly, I think that practice area works a lot differently than a lot of other areas of law. But yeah, basically, to get more specific on it, competitive advantage has to be relevant for the person that you're in front of, right? For some places, it's like, if you're where you're at, Jordan, like you weren't going to outbid Morgan and Morgan, right? So when you guys are going after stuff for your personal injury practice, you're focusing on different things. I mean, actually, I think we went on that on our show, right? Where you're doing this stuff for the different college students and that kind of thing, which was a competitive advantage to them. But it's kind of, there's sort of two sides to a competitive advantage now that I kind of think about it. Like there's I guess like global competitive advantages. Like if you're the person who's, done, I don't know, XYZ billions of dollars in verdicts, that's a pretty good competitive advantage. But when you're zooming in on an initial like individual, competitive advantages for who you are as the prospect looking at a piece of marketing is sometimes going to be more relevant, right? It's like there's situations where people are operating in sub niches, right? And just to kind of think of a specific example that I have, there's a firm that we were working with in Atlanta, and the proprietor was a gay guy. And basically, he was really accessible to non-traditional families. So if somebody was in that specific niche, that was what they had. And they have the choice of, do I want to go with the most esteemed, like marquee estate planning firm in Atlanta, or do I want to go with somebody who understands my situation at like a deep level? And that's a choice that every prospect makes. But I think there's a lot of benefits to going niche, and that's a whole different conversation to kind of get started with. But looping back in towards that price thing, right? One of the issues that I see a bunch is that that's ultimately it's sort of your monopoly power, right? Like if you have a huge competitive advantage, then you have more of an ability to charge what you want, because it's non-exchangeable with other people that might be showing up on whatever platform you happen to be showing up on, right? And like I always come from the world like way back in the day, like we were 100% about Google Ads. So there's no one, the best Google Ads person in the world can't make you be the only person who shows up on that result, right? So it's like we kind of base that as table stakes for most of the life of the agency. But it's like depending on what the I guess like the arena that you're in, like there's always like options, but you have to get people's attention to the point where you can communicate that advantage in the first place, right? And you have to have the targeting to make sure that you're getting in front of people that message matters to the first place, right? So yeah, there's a lot of dimensions to it.
So correct me if I'm wrong here, because we keep talking about niche. In essence, it sounds like niche is kind of the what you do, and competitive advantage is how you do it better for a specific client. Is that a fair assessment, or am I missing the point here?
No, I'd say that's fair. And like competitive advantage too, it's like basically if we're getting to like super old school, I think the people who really started popularizing this were like I think Michael Porter from Harvard Business School, like way back in the 80s. So it's like there's things on that, but I think the way that those things are, because there's like a general and a specific sense of that, but like competitive advantage can also be an advantage that you have as a firm, right? So it's like if you have the ability to do work cheaper, better, deeper, with a certain thing, then that's absolutely something that you can do. And like that's kind of like more of like an economics competitive advantage, right? But yeah, I would say broadly the competitive advantage is something that's more localized towards you, and then I think like the niche would be more localized towards like who you're trying to serve.
So I guess actually let me back up for a second. I am hopeful that anybody listening to or watching this wants to have a competitive advantage and does not want to be just a quote another lawyer unquote. So getting past the concept of you should have a competitive advantage, if we sat down with an attorney on day one and they were redoing everything in their firm, They were willing to put whatever it was as their competitive advantage. They were willing to start working towards it. How do you come up with what that competitive advantage should be? And then let's talk about how do you, utilize that better.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I would say like one of the things that we ask like when we get somebody on, and there's a couple different directions they can go in. And like within the stuff that we do specifically, it's like usually going to be like general estate planning or like asset protection for elder, or like, some variety of asset protection for wealthy people or guardianship or something like that. So there's not a tremendous amount of different things that we can do as far as the pre-planning stage. But if people have multiple, the first question I usually ask is going to be, which one of these excites you the most? At the end of the day, and I think most people, I would say it's more common than not that attorneys will have kind of like a buffet of options. It's very rare that you see like a day one attorney who's like, I do this and this is all I do. So I think one of the biggest things to do is, but this is the thing, like you kind of have a lot of different roads that you can potentially go down as a day one attorney. And the thing is that like one of the things is it's kind of impossible to see where any of these roads will lead over the course of like the next 6 months, year, whatever. But probably the best indicator of where things could be good, I think, is excitement, right? So I think the first thing would be deciding on which one to really focus on. I think like your energy around that is probably what I would recommend following. It's kind of interesting. There's like, do you ever hear this like cheesy quote? Do you know like the Latin, the root of the word decide, Jordan?
I have no idea.
Yeah, it's the same as death. So it's like decimate. So basically, decide is to kill. So to truly make a decision is to cut yourself off. It's to cut or to kill. So it's to truly decide is to cut off other options. And past the point where you have something that you're really doing, that's honestly one of the biggest things. Because basically, as far as competitive advantage goes, just because you like something more on day one doesn't mean that's your competitive advantage. That becomes a competitive advantage, months, years, decades down the line, hopefully, because you've been running into the problems more frequently in that chosen field than the other people who might be doing it once every 6 months or every 10 years or something like that. So I think it's super important to start from a place, but there's kind of, and then like, as far as like the process for going up, like, it's just like one of the things, I just recorded a podcast episode on this, so it's like super top of mind, but going out there and actually just doing this stuff is pretty much how you get started. And like, we can get more specific on what that sort of entails, but one of the things that I see as a super, super common problem is that people kind of have this, they sort of defer their decisions to how things are going to prove out. And like, I'm all for market research and all that stuff, but basically some people operate with like, okay, well, if this works out, I should get some sort of like a really easy get in the beginning. And then if I'm encountering resistance, that's evidence to me that this is the wrong path I'm not on. So you have this situation where somebody might care about something, or they might not make a decision in the first place. So they're hedging their bets. And then that's how you guaranteed not to develop any sort of a competitive advantage, is if you're running away when you run into the first hurdle for anything that you do.
But like, so obviously I totally agree with you in terms of attorney on day one. But like, let's say somebody came to you with an established practice. So they're not doing door law, threshold law, whatever. Like they've got that niche, but they're redoing all of their marketing from the ground up, so you're talking to them about what cases they like, but then like, how does that become the benefit of them versus the attorney doing the same practice area next door? Like, do you have them outline what makes them better? Do you walk them through some questions to ask? Like, how does that conversation take place?
Okay, super good. And then let me zoom in a little bit on like a really specific case, and I'll just kind of go into some of the stuff that we're doing for the estate planning. So, okay. So as far as, in the general case, the important thing is you have to get people's attention. This would be cross-channel. We're going to get super zoomed into automated webinars on Facebook in about 30 seconds. But across channel, the really important thing is that you have to get people's attention so that you have the opportunity to educate them on why you're different. So they can, at that point, decide whether it's something they care about or not, right? So the way that we do that with estate planning attorneys is we use webinars. So, and this is like a pretty stark contrast to what we were doing as far as Google Ads before. And like, actually, one of the big reasons that I went into Facebook for estate planning attorneys, it's like one of the things I always think about is kind of channel market fit. So basically, we were having a lot of success with pretty much every practice area except for estate planning attorneys. And the issue that we had with estate planning attorneys was they kept saying, we're just getting price shopped like crazy. And not that price shopping isn't an issue for other areas of law, but it's a particularly big issue for estate planning because you don't have that hair on fire challenge. So somebody can take the luxury of, I hope there aren't any sickos like that out there in your market, but they could literally say, yeah, I'm going to take the first 10 pages of Google. I'm going to talk to one attorney every other day, and I'm going to truly get the best decision at the lowest price or whatever. People can do that as long as they don't die at some point. That's theoretically possible.
I'm from Florida, so it's probably that motivated by like raccoon made meth. So we definitely have it's definitely an experience.
Yeah. But, to contrast with other areas of law, it's like if you got, the ICE agents are knocking at your door, or your wife just served you the divorce papers, or you're in the hospital with the full body cast, you can't take a year to make that decision. So we had to super zoom in on this from the estate planning perspective. So as far as how we communicate that too, it's a little bit different. So it's like basically instead of selling the phone call or the consultation, and we actually tried that on Facebook for a while. Mixed results, I will say generously. But why this ended up working is that we basically only had to sell access to sort of like information, right? And there's kind of a give and take with this, right? So the cool thing about estate planning, and again, it's what we do. This is not the only application for this kind of funnel, but if you guys want to think in a more broad sense about where this might be able to interact with your practice area, I think for a lot of that more demand event stuff, if you're in the situation where your practice area is a hair on fire problem, this might not be the best fit. But if there's anything where there's a gap in education, and I'll just give a super simple example for estate planning. Most people, in my opinion, if they truly knew what the probate process would do to their family, would be incentivized to take the next steps towards solving that. It's not general. A lot of times this was like a really surprising piece of feedback. Is like I've been in doing estate planning market since 2016, but it was like people were like, when I tell people about the costs associated with probate, it's a jaw-dropping moment in live seminars. I'm like, how do people not know this? But that's kind of your advantage. So you have something that you're an expertise in as an attorney. That's not something that everyone knows. So if you can basically figure out a way to make that enticing, to educate people about something like that, webinar is one way to do it, then you also have an opportunity to differentiate yourself. So if I'm really kind of like digging into it, like what sort of happens with this, the way that you reach somebody actually is a point of differentiation itself. Because if you're the person who's doing the webinar ad when everyone else is doing the Facebook lead ad or the YouTube ad, or well, probably not YouTube ad, Google ad, or like the lead magnet ad, then that's a point of differentiation. That's a competitive advantage in and of itself. But what I really like about this particular strategy is it's a little gambit that buys you a lot of bandwidth from somebody, right? Because basically if we've gotten that sign up for $5 or $10, hopefully, and that person ends up showing up on the webinar, now we have a captive-ish audience for probably between 45 and 55 minutes, which is really cool. And that's where we have a lot of time to really make distance compared to the other attorneys there. I'm like going way back in the day to kind of generalize this for estate planning. It's like, this is why it's interesting. Like when we were like really going into this, one of the things that like we always used to do whenever we have a prospect that hops on a phone call or schedule some time with us is like, we just check out their law firm website. And you can suss out pretty quickly after you do 5 or 10 or 20 of these. And I wouldn't recommend anyone do this unless you're really bored, but you can pretty much tell how big a practice is by like at a glance at their website before too long. And when we ever got on the phone, we asked people pretty candidly about the revenues. And if they were serious, they'd volunteer them. But like we came to the conclusion that for the most part, the market leaders anywhere in the country, and like probably the vast majority of estate planning boutique practices that were doing more than 7 figures, almost all of them were using some variation of direct mail to seminars prior to 2020. And the reason that this works, exact same principle. Do I have your attention to the point of view? And again, we're bribing them, for lack of a better word, for most cases with the dinner or the, whatever, the meet and greet. But once we have them captive, then we have the opportunity to make difference. So the thing is that, so the channel itself is a competitive advantage. If you have a way to communicate that information, this is why that's a competitive advantage. You've gotten an hour of someone's time, an hour that they've spent with you and your expertise. And at the end, if your price is higher, they have to weigh that against the possibility of going with somebody who they don't understand. And that ultimately is what gives people the ability to charge what they deserve, because they don't have to compete on, the 10 lines of text that you wrote versus the 10 lines of text the other guy wrote. And I think honestly, that's true of a lot of channels that are active right now. And again, like, we are speaking about estate planning attorneys specifically, but there's a lot of principles that can be kind of generalized from this. But like, yeah, think about it. If you have the opportunity to have an hour worth of time with somebody, in the form of a webinar. And again, there are some givens built into that. It's got to be a webinar that people stay on for an hour. And we can absolutely talk about how to do that. But, that's a huge advantage compared to your Avvo listing versus the next person's Avvo listing, right? And then you're less likely to get price shopped. Again, obviously nothing's impossible, but you at least have a reason why somebody would want to go with you instead of somebody else. And that's ultimately what it comes down to. Like, the competitive advantage, the more of a difference that you can make on your practice, and this is for any practice, the more of a difference you have, the less likely you are to be price shopped. Like, think about it. If you want to buy an electric car in the United States today, I think there are other brands, but there's really nothing besides Tesla that's seriously out there. But like, if you're trying to buy laundry detergent on Amazon, there's probably 50 different options. They'll all probably do the same thing. So it's like, what camp are you pushing yourself towards, and the approach that you're taking to people, and like, how you're developing your practice as a whole.
So, okay, so the competitive advantage, it doesn't have to be that like you've been through a terrible probate as the client. It doesn't have to be that you have your, financial planning degree, so you're better at estate plans. It can be how you're marketing it. It can be the information you share. It can be how you position yourself as the go-to expert.
Yeah, I would say. And the other thing too is that, all those things can be the competitive advantage. The thing is that it's how you can communicate it, right? It's like, this is the thing. Like, if you have a really good personal story, that's something that works really, really well in webinars, by the way. If you have a really good personal story, it doesn't matter if you have that, if you can't communicate that. But once you have the ability to take advantage of somebody's attention, again, this could be in your consultation process. This could be in the hold message on your phone. This could be on your website. This could be a lot of different things. But basically, a lot of these things can be a competitive advantage. But it's just like, I think the way that I like to think about it is just like invisibly imagining your competitors in a room with you, or in front of imagine you're speed dating with your competitors, right? And God, hopefully it never gets to that point. But if you're ready for that, if the day comes, you'll be ready for the day with hopefully you don't have to.
Makes perfect sense. So I guess that leads me to this question. Sort of, I want to backtrack to that attorney on day one who doesn't necessarily have the giant expertise, doesn't have the budget along those lines. Like, obviously, you still need a competitive advantage, and you still need something that's genuine and honest. So how do you thread the needle, or when do you make that transition from, my competitive advantage being, I'm always going to be the one answering the phone, it's always going to be me, you're going to have me the whole time, to a more scalable firm, to a larger firm as you grow? Do you work towards getting away from that competitive advantage? Do you split your time? How do you make those decisions on the one you have today versus building the one that you want later?
Okay, gotcha. And that's a really good point, Jordan, because it's like, that's pretty much the stakes that everyone starts out with, right? It's like, I always say it's like you start off on day one, probably, unless you hit a big windfall or a rich uncle or something like that, it's going to be not a lot of time, or not a lot of money, but a lot of time. And then gradually we want to get to the point where you have, usually it goes a lot of time, no money, no time, a lot of money. If you're doing it right with your numbers, then hopefully you get to the point where it's a lot of time and a lot of money, but it usually isn't kind of like a linear path like that. But basically I'll say that like in the early days, like service is actually a really easy competitive advantage to kind of go with. And it is an advantage. Like that's like, you have to position it like that though. There's like a really tough, like kind of like death valley that I find a lot of attorneys go into, where it's like, if you're going to be, this is the problem that I see often. You have the situation where people are not pricing themselves well, or this is like probably the easiest sand trap that I see like early attorneys is like, our competitive advantage is we do great work for a reasonable price. And that really stops you from ever getting to the point where you have money but no time. And then it's a huge one for stopping you have money and time, because you have to eventually hire people if you want to get your time back, right? So if you're building your competitive advantage on that, then it really stinks. But basically, yeah, like after you've kind of decided, your competitive advantage becomes the problems that you're working towards, right? And this could be in your caseload. This could be in the marketing channels you're going after. This could be in the issues that you're running into in consultations. Like, I'll give you an example. We're working with a firm right now, and he's in a particular part of the Northeast where a lot of people, it's just, older demographics, which you think are really great for estate planning, and it is. But the problem is a lot of the people he's talking to already have plans in place. So basically, we had like a really tough week or two where he was just like, I just can't close these guys. They all have plans in place. And like, how am I supposed to sell against this? They're just sending me their plans and saying, what's the price? And like, tell me how much it's going to take to fix this. So basically what we ended up working on with him was, how can we preempt those? So we know the questions are coming. How can we get our intake script and our consultation around that, so that we're having a consultation, we're able to do a deep dive with them, with the stuff in front, and we can be straight up with them. Hey, look, I know you have some expectations, but this is the thing. It's not kind of dry bones. I have no context on what was important to you when those documents were drafted. I have no idea whether the attorney did it right. So what we're gonna have to do is have a consultation anyway. 3 possibilities. 1, you're all good. I'll let you know, and you don't have to hire me at all. Second thing is, it's garbage. We're gonna have to rewrite the whole thing and do it in place. And the third option is, there's some things that we can have amendments, but I'll tell you what you need and how it's going to go. And that was a problem that he was facing on, the first couple of weeks of having the campaign live. But the thing is that he got through it, and now he has a competitive advantage, which is he knows how to close people that already have plans in place. And if that's the state of the union in the market, that's something he can keep with him for as long as he wants to practice there. So that's one of those things too. I think a lot of the competitive advantages that people get, it's like, I used this metaphor the other day. It's like, you get a pearl in an oyster where there's a piece of grit. Your competitive advantage is the pearls that you end up winning, but every single time the piece of grit is something that you're facing. Another super thing, if you're thinking about a lot of the people who have a really, really niche, medical malpractice, specialties and that kind of stuff. At one point, they were probably on their 80th hour this week, on the 4th cup of coffee. They hadn't slept in 2 days, trying to crack this case, but they ended up figuring out. And now that's the case that they have on their website. And that's the thing that they're getting referred to because they did such a good job with it. So as far as developing a competitive advantage, I don't want to say it's just just set it on autopilot and it's going to figure it out. But the thing is that if you're taking steps in the right direction, it's kind of like a video game, honestly. It's the monsters start coming your way. You end up defeating them. You get your XP and then you level up. So if you're heading in a direction that matters to you, then you're going to pick up competitive advantages. But the prerequisites is that you can't run away from it. And you have to be creative and integrate the feedback that the market's giving you, right? The way to not develop competitive advantage, I know this is the thing just to kind of call back earlier, is if we took the guy I mentioned earlier, if he'd run into that and said, well, this really sucks, I guess this marketing doesn't work, or maybe I should move my office or something like that, then you don't really have competitive advantages. And the other thing too is that I think kind of one of the false beliefs behind that is that, and you'll see this from people that end up in the same place year after year, it's just the belief that there is an easy path is kind of ignoring the possibility that competitive advantage is out there, right? Because if there's an easy path, it's gonna if it's easy for you, it's gonna be easy for everyone else. And having, been around for a couple of years, it's there's, I've seen the tide shift on a lot of channels that we worked with. I've seen competitors rise. I've seen competitors fall. It's never easy. Nothing's a given. And if it is easy, it's going to be, it's going to be flooded before soon. Take it from, you understand, with that starting a law practice versus starting an agency, it doesn't take a 2-year, 3-year degree to start an agency. So there's, a lot of competitive advantages in there, but it's easy in some ways, but it's difficult in other ones. So yeah, basically, if you're taking steps in the right direction and solving problems intelligently, that's ultimately how you develop a sustainable competitive advantage. Also one that's tailored to you because it's based on your experience. And ultimately it's something that you're gonna be able to leverage in your market because that's where you're developing it, right?
So it's interesting because it sounds like so much of what you're talking about the competitive advantage is sort of looking back at your history, looking back at the cases you've handled, looking back at what you've learned. Is that the way to find your competitive advantage? Is it that constantly seeing, where you've come from?
It depends. I mean, a lot of these things seem super obvious in retrospect, but I think at any stage of the journey, it's where the energy is coming from is usually a good place to follow. And I don't want to be too woo-woo about it, but it's just there's certain things that you may not realize at the time, but it's like, it's a natural advantage for you, you know? And like, you know, the more woo-woo among us would say that's signals from the universe. Like the more psychologically aligned of us would say that's, you know, you're in a flow state or something like that. So you can usually, you know, it's kind of like the, you know, the old definition, you know, when you see it as far as that. But like, yeah, looking back I would say looking back becomes more useful the farther along in your journey you get, right? But like one of the things that this is kind of an interesting concept, sort of like related to this whole thing, but it's just like the adjacent possible. Um, is
The
that ever
adjacent possible?
the adjacent possible, right?
Okay.
So this was first explained to me in like this metaphor of like a spotlight, right? So if you think about it, like imagine where you're at today, and this could be the attorney on day one, right? They have the spotlight facing down on them, and they can see one step in any direction. If you step on the one step, then a new couple of steps are gonna reach out, right? And basically, it's kind of hard to tell what, like, you're not gonna be able to see 5 steps ahead generally. You're only going to be able to see the couple steps ahead, maybe if you're super lucky about it. And there's like a lot of definition. Like those actually, it becomes easier to see farther ahead as you get longer in your journey, just because of pattern matching and that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, like you can also see as many steps as you want behind. So when you're starting out, all you really have is the direction that you can go at the moment. But as things progress, you can absolutely take a look back. So it's like you probably have a much easier time. This is like true of all marketing too. Like, you know, if you run a YouTube campaign for like 6 months, it's like, you know, the data is there to be able to cut off whatever audiences are not working for you or whatever. And the same thing, it's like, but you can only make decisions moving forward. You can always analyze moving backwards. So like, if you have the data, like taking a retroactive, and I mean, it's tough sometimes if you're trying to be honest with yourself and what you like, but there's other ways too. Like, you know, if it's all the same to somebody, like it's not like, you know, that's having an awesome like inflow workday every day isn't everyone's priority. You can just, you know, the backup question is, you know, what brings in the most revenue or what brings in the most profit? Like if you got equal decisions, you know, that's a great tiebreaker if you need one.
Well, and along those lines, though, it sounds like you're saying don't hesitate or don't be so afraid of changing competitive advantage. You know, if it started out as the I'm always going to answer the phone, and now it's, you know, we've got the team that has the expertise in different things, like don't be afraid to make that swap. You know, if it's the biggest case you had, if it's the changing practice areas, if it, you know, if you get a different background, if you have a different life experience, you know, am I correct in that like that you are telling people don't be afraid about changing that competitive advantage if they have one that's better, and I mean better and more impactful, more in line with what they want, more,
I would,
you know, feasible?
Yeah, I would say yes with some caveats, because it's like, I think it's the right recommendation for somebody who's a little bit down the line in the journey. It's a dangerous recommendation for somebody who's getting started out, because like if they don't have anything, it's very easy to get stuck in the analysis paralysis. And that's when you see the people who've been practicing for 20 years and it's a general practice, and they're not particularly good at anything that they do. A good metaphor for this is driving a car. Like it's easier to turn the wheels when you're moving, right? And basically on top of that, like as long as you're moving forward, even if what you were doing isn't like one-to-one directly applicable to where you want to change things, there's elements of a lot of these things are going to move forward, and like not an insignificant one. And I think this is why I focus a ton on intake stuff in the last 2 years or so, is that if you figure out how to close people from one channel or one practice area, that's a very portable skill. Regardless of what you're, air quotes, selling at the end of the day, which I know is not a popular word in the legal community. But, you know, if you can figure out someone to, how to persuade somebody that you're the right personal injury attorney for somebody, there's a couple steps to adapt it, but it's not tremendously difficult from, convincing somebody that you're the right estate planning attorney for them. That's a pretty rare crossover in terms of practice areas. There's obviously some adaptations, but if you're learning how to close people that aren't a referral, that's a very portable skill. So you might not take every single, Lego block with you to the next stage of the journey, but like, it's also, sometimes these skill sets pop up in interesting, useful ways as things go on.
So as we get towards the end here, I mean, are there any do we miss anything, or are there any like best tips or best practices that you want to make sure that we cover for attorneys?
Oof, good one. I mean, this was like a very philosophical episode. Like, I'm trying to think as far as, I've had some super, super tactical things, and like, I'm trying to think. It's like almost would be a can of worms at this point. I would say if there's like one thing that I'm really talking about a lot these days, it's taking the initiative on content marketing type stuff. And again, the example that we have is webinars, and like this is something that we found in the last year or so. Like basically, I think a lot of people have been sold a false bill of goods, and I don't think any of the people who started doing this were doing it for the right reason. I just think they genuinely didn't know any better. 2020 was a huge experiment for everybody, but a lot of the times, even really, really great content requires you to go ahead and take the first step as the person who put on that piece of content. So the example that I've been using, talking about a lot these days, is if you consider a seminar versus a webinar. With the people that we've talked about from seminars, for the most part, like people have, if they have it set up in a good way, have a good solid call to action, you'll probably have 80% of the people that you're going to close eventually from that seminar will have filled out the card, went to the back of the room, blah, blah, blah at that point. And you can follow up with the 20% if you want to. And a lot of people don't. On the flip side, when you're talking about something like a webinar where there's less, of a literally captive audience, in a lot of cases we're talking about online, you have to take the first step. And like, this isn't like, go to their house and, to hold a radio over your head, like say anything. It's like, you just, call somebody and say, hey, look, I saw you attend the webinar the other day. Like, did you have any interest in taking advantage of XYZ offer that we put at the end of it? And it sounds absolutely crazy, but that is responsible for 3 or 4xing the returns that our clients are getting from that kind of marketing. But and again, don't tune this out if you're not an estate planning attorney who's using webinars. I think a lot of the stuff that people put out there with lead magnets, I think a lot of the stuff that people put out there with content like this, honestly, like, send a Facebook message to somebody who likes your Facebook Live post, you'd be surprised. And again, like there's a lot of stuff around process and how to make that. Like, I think there's a lot of reasons why people don't do that. The mental aspect is one of many, but like, yeah, it's pretty interesting to see what can happen just by taking the first step with a lot of people. And it's not solicitation, because it's like they've opted in on some level. That's the thing. It's like, so I think it's a very exciting time because we're kind of seeing this interesting merge of a lot of strategies that have kind of been used exclusively for, verticals and domains other than law for a while, that are really, really well developed, but it's only for the first time that some of these are becoming available for attorneys. And it's just because of, a shifting landscape over the last year, among other things.
So then, all right, I'm going to jump in on a couple specific things that people can take away then.
Yeah. Hit me.
Ask clients. Go to your clients. Why did you hire me? What was your favorite part about working with us? What did you wish we had done better? Things like that, because you're going to find, you have the potential to find competitive advantages, or at least to find sales pitches for future people or content to put out there, because you're going to have clients. Hopefully it's not, I came to you because you were the cheapest. Hopefully it's, I came to you because you made me feel the most comfortable. You really listened. I love that you previously had done X. I love that you were also in Y organization. I love that, whatever it is there. And then as they're working through the process, I love that you all were proactive in reaching out to me. I love that I could get a hold of you within 24 hours at any time. I love that whatever those clients say, as you hear those things consistently, a lot of those things I think become your competitive advantage coming right from your clients' mouths, which will get you more clients like that, which will get you better reviews, which will, allow you to continue down this path. So that's my advice. If you,
I agree with that. And I'll also say, if you could happen to get that on a Zoom recording and then put that on your site, getting that in a video testimonial is fantastic. Like, I'm trying to think, what are the ones that we usually ask? It's like, what was your situation when you found us? Why did you decide to go with us over somebody else with us at this point? And yeah, it's like, and a lot of times too, it's kind of funny. It's like, I feel like people haven't been speaking about testimonials enough these days. It's like, I know the Google reviews things are having sort of a renaissance. Shout out to Andy. But basically, I think the video reviews and getting that stuff on your site too is good, because look, hey, competitive advantage. If you've done it, you might as well let people know that you did it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So our next episode, that is going to air next Monday. That features Corey Kelly, who's going to talk about your client's experience and how you can secure 5-star reviews. So we have truly taken this full circle, or I guess we have dovetailed into the reviews along those lines. Corey has some really interesting legal tech that I think is going to help people provide a better client experience, which will lead to more reviews he's going to be talking to us about on Monday. To find out more about that, you're going to have to come back on Monday at 1:30 Eastern time to check it. But enough about that. All right, Jan, the diamond nugget of wisdom. If somebody's been listening to this for the last, 45 minutes, they take nothing from what you've said except what we're about to talk about right now. What is your biggest piece of insight, your biggest takeaway, your most important advice to our attorney listener watchers on how they can become the exhibit A of a successful attorney?
There's like an old quote that I think it was like a Zig Ziglar quote or something like that. It's like, you have to be thankful for the problems that you're facing today, because it's going to be what people are paying you for tomorrow. Stay in the pocket, work through whatever happens to be, whether it's a marketing challenge, whether it's a client challenge, whether it's an intake challenge. If you get through that, that is a feather in your cap that you have that chances are your competition isn't going to take the time to figure out. And the harder it is, the more true that is.
Awesome. I love it. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Jordan. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Exhibit A Attorneys. If you're interested in becoming the Exhibit A of a successful attorney, please check us out at LegalEaseMarketing.com, EASE.